Okay, over the page then, it's saying a farmer investigated 2 methods of increasing nitrate levels in the soil in 2 fields, A and B. So we grew clover plants during year 1 in field A, and then they were applied back into the soil and left to decompose. So we've just been talking about clover. I've been talking about Sam, Nikki. What's the important thing? We've been talking about clover. What happens in the root nodules? What's made? Nitrates. So basically, in the exam, you could write nitrates because of clover. So whenever they were applied back into the soil, left to decompose, the nitrates were getting into the soil, so that in year 2, they will have lots of nitrates there, so you'd expect a lot of growth. And if we look there, field A, year 2, we've got a large yield. Yield means the amount of corn or whatever it is that's being harvested. Field B, left fallow. That means nothing was planted. So if you don't know what that means, you should write that on. So it was just left as waste. In the spring of year 2 and year 3, he planted wheat in both fields. He measured the wheat obtained from each field in the autumn of year 2 and 3, and here we've got some of the results. So obviously nothing is growing in year 1 because nothing was planted there, there's no yield. He didn't harvest anything, didn't plant any wheat, so there's no wheat in year 1. So it tells you, okay, so the wheat yield is kilograms of wheat per hectare, which is like an area. Okay, so you maybe heard of acres and so on. It's a sort of the modern term. Acre is like old-fashioned, like miles, whereas hectare is the metric unit. So suggests why the wheat yield for field A was lower in 3 than it was in 2. Well, remember, at the end of year 1, there's lots of nitrate there. And so obviously during year 2, the wheat use up some of the nitrate, so they absorb it, and then they're harvested so it's not replaced. So that essentially is your answer to part 1. So some of the nitrate was used up by the wheat and was harvested. Okay. Is that biology you've got there?
Me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I thought you said you hadn't got your books.
No, I said I'm on homework.
Oh, sorry. No homework. Sorry.
That's Zoe who threw out her books.
Yeah, Zoe and Cara. Right, so in field B then, so the total wheat yield was obtained, 60% of the total wheat yield was obtained in year 2, so we're saying this is 60%. So that means 40% was obtained in year 3. Calculate the wheat yield obtained from field B in year 2 and 3. Well, you know the total. So 60%, you're basically working out 60% of that and then 40% or what's left over. So 3,495, 60% of that, so that's times 60 divided by 100. You should have got 2097 for that. So that's year 2. And year 3, you can either work out 40% or you can just take that figure away from the total. But either way, you get 1,398. Who got the 2 figures there?
Not me.
Okay. So, using that information and what you know about the nitrogen cycle suggests why field A had a higher total wheat yield than field B. Okay, there's 3 marks for this. So what is the obvious answer? Well, we've said field A, okay, there's clover there. And so the clover, you must mention the clover to get 3 marks out of 3. So to get full marks, you have to talk about clover was planted in year 1 for field A. So why would that create such a difference? Well, when it decomposes,
Releases nitrates.
it's going to release nitrates, or you could say there's more nitrogen gas converted into nitrate. Or you could say more nitrogen fixation than in field B. Okay, the next question. It shows the results of obviously the next question there we've already done in our notes. So that's page 36 and 37. You already answered that. So the next one is page 38. The results of an investigation into the amount of nitrates taken up by wheat plants. So plants were grown in containers in a lab, and fertiliser was placed at 4 different depths beneath the soil surface. And they did it 10 times at each depth, and they worked out an average, and they've plotted the average uptake of nitrates. So essentially, what are we seeing there? Depth of fertiliser along the bottom, and you're seeing that the fertiliser that was nearest the surface, in other words here, gives us the best yield. A little bit lower, still gives us very good yield, but there's a significant decrease in the uptake of nitrates the deeper you go in the soil. So the first question basically says, one conclusion suggested from these results was that when growing wheat, fertiliser should be placed just below the surface of the soil. So they're saying, put the fertiliser around this depth here, just below the surface of the soil. So what evidence supports that? So you're saying the trend is the deeper the fertiliser, the less nitrogen is taken up. Or you could have had the opposite to that, the inverse, which is the closer to the surface, the more fertiliser is taken up by plants, or the more nitrates are taken up by plants. So 1 mark from that. But when it says give evidence from the graph, it's looking for an actual figure. So that's worth bearing in mind. Exam technique, if they're asking for evidence from a graph, they're looking for a trend. But if there's 2 marks for it, they definitely, they really want you to quote a figure. So you could say, for example, 0.2 centimetres below the surface, 88% of nitrate was taken up. Okay? So just be careful. You need one about sort of the fact that most of the nitrate is taken up just below the surface, or at 0.2 metres, and then you need to quote a figure. Suggest why this conclusion may not be justified. Well, if I rub out what I've been drawing there, what would you want to do if you wanted to justify that conclusion? Would you be happy with just those figures, or what would you do? Jake, what would you do?
Use the one in between as well.
Yeah, there's nothing there. There's nothing between 0 and 0.2. So why would the conclusion not be justified? There's no readings between 0 and 0.2 metres.
How do you get fertiliser 1.4 metres deep in the ground?
They had to dig it and put it in.
That's such a hard thing.
It's in a lab, so they would have had containers, they'd put soil, then they would put fertiliser, soil, made it up to a certain depth. So, one way of improving the investigation would be to use the same method, but put fertiliser at more depths. So they've only done it at 4 different depths.
But what's the point in that? Because no farmer is going to go and plant fertiliser that deep down.
Well, they're trying to find, is it best on the surface, a little bit below, is it worth putting a layer of soil over the top? They want to find out the best conditions to grow. If you're a farmer, you want to know what gives the best yield. Okay, on to page 40 then. So page 40 is a nitrogen cycle. Processes A and B. So, Joshua, what did you put for A? Good. So A is nitrogen fixation, and B then, Daniel, what did you put for B? Well, B is actually decomposition because it's coming from the dead animals. All right. Use diagram to help suggest how flooding decreases the concentration of nitrogen compounds in the soil. So nitrogen compounds we're talking here are nitrates. So can you remember what we said the last day about flooding and the problem with flooding in the nitrogen cycle? Okay, so the soil gets waterlogged, and therefore, what's the problem with the nitrogen cycle? It's what?
What was the question?
When it gets waterlogged, what problem does that cause the nitrogen cycle?
Oxygen can't get in.
Okay, so there's no oxygen, so what process happens then in anaerobic conditions?
Gentrification.
Denitrification, yeah. So you're saying there that basically there's more denitrification because the conditions are anaerobic, or there's no oxygen, therefore denitrification occurs.
Do you grow many vegetables yourself?
Pardon?
Do you grow many vegetables?
Am I growing? No. So, in the soil, ammonium compounds can be converted into nitrates. So, Chloe, what's that? Nitrification. Why is nitrate content of the soil important? Well, it's because it's needed to make what? Amino acids. Or if you said proteins. And for another mark, what else do you need to say? There's 2 marks for this. You're only going to get 1 mark for saying that. What do they then bring about in the plant? Growth. Okay, the diagram shows some artificial fertiliser. Why do farmers apply fertiliser to their fields? Okay, so you get 1 mark for saying to add nutrients or to replace nutrients that have been harvested. 2nd mark, why do they want to add nutrients?
Increases yield.
Yeah, to increase the yield or crop growth or profit. Yeah. Okay, the last page of questions. 2 reasons why they use artificial fertiliser. Instead of natural fertiliser, and then that question is basically asking you what are the advantages of artificial fertiliser over natural fertiliser. So Clara, what can you think of?
Because you can get the exact
Amount of,
nutrients.
yeah. So you can, you know the content of the nutrients, or you get the exact amount of nitrates or whatever you need. Another advantage, Sam?
You know the exact ratio of.
Well, that's along the same lines, so you can get the exact content, yeah.
It's easier to less smelly than natural fertilizer.
Easier to handle, easier to store. Yeah, I'm not sure they would give you the mark for less smelly. I know exactly what you mean because it's slurry stinks, but you need to sort of trying to get into the habit of using the right terminology. The last question there, application of excess fertilisers may cause water pollution. How do fertilisers enter river water? Well, the first thing has to happen is it dissolves. The nutrients dissolve in what? What dissolves the nutrients?
Water.
Where does the water come from? The rain. So it dissolves in the rainwater. And then it runs off, or the term we use, it is leached. So it leaches, runs off, because remember we said it trickles down, hits the rock, nowhere to go except into streams, rivers, lakes, and so on. Okay, let's have a look at page 45 then. So, page 45, you should be able to do the first two questions really quickly. Page 45. Okay, so Daniel, why do plants need nitrates? Yeah, perfect. So we've answered this question several times already. So we know 2 marks. We need to say to produce amino acids or proteins for growth. All right. Nikki, what's the process roots use to absorb nitrates?
Active transport.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Where's your question book? Can we get it out?
But as in the order.
But I'm still going through questions.
What page are you on?
We're on page 45. So, if we look at the graph then. Okay, it's talking about the winter. It's saying that temperature is low, in other words, it's cold, and the soil is often waterlogged. So when you see waterlogged, you're going to think anaerobic conditions. Which process is anaerobic? You've already told me this already today.
Denitrification.
Denitrification. Denitrification is when nitrates are converted into what? Yeah, nitrogen gas, which is useless. So that is a really bad thing to happen, because if you're a farmer, you want to have as many nitrates in the soil. So if your fields get waterlogged, that's really bad, because the nitrates are going to be released into the atmosphere as gas, nitrogen gas. And that is really bad, because then that's nutrients that your plants are going to miss out on. So, in the winter, it's anaerobic. It could be anaerobic. In other words, you could be losing nitrates from the soil. Can we stop that, please? Okay, so the graph shows the changes in the amount of nitrogen compounds. So that's nitrate, usually. In wheat plants and the soil between November and August. So November to August, the wheat plants, I'll go over in red there. Low levels, and then during the spring when they start to grow, they obviously absorb a lot of the nitrates and they grow. And you can see there the level of nitrates is falling in the soil. So, first question says, the graph shows between November and January, nitrogen compounds in the soil drop from 95 to 65 kilograms per hectare. The difference may be due to denitrification. How does this process cause a fall in the amount of nitrogen compounds in the soil? So November and January is the winter, so you would say the soil may be waterlogged. You get 1 mark for saying that. Chloe, you're not leaving here until you got the answers written in. Sorry, Nikki. Sorry. So the soil might be waterlogged. Therefore, conditions would be anaerobic. So, denitrifying bacteria would change nitrates into nitrogen gas. Okay, so we've said the soil might be waterlogged, making conditions anaerobic. Therefore, denitrifying bacteria would change nitrates into nitrogen gas. Leaching may also cause a fall in the amount of nitrogen compounds in the soil. So how? Well, basically the nitrates dissolve in the rainwater and move down through the soil into streams, rivers, whatever.
Charger.